Captain Zix-7 stood on the bridge of the Velcarian exploration vessel Nexus Dawn and watched the strange readings on his screen. The ship had been traveling through the outer edge of the Kepler 442 system for 3 days when the sensors picked up something unusual. The object was big and made of metal, but it was not moving. It just floated in the dark space between planets like a dead thing. The readings made no sense to Zix-7. The object was clearly a ship, but its design was unlike anything in their database. The Velcarians had traveled the galaxy for thousands of years and had seen ships from every known race. This one was different. It had sharp angles and looked mean even though it was not moving. The metal was dark and covered with scars from old battles. Whatever had built this ship knew how to fight. Science Officer Keth 9 walked over to the captain with her tablet in hand. She was young for a Velcarian and very smart. Her blue skin was pale with worry as she showed the readings to her captain. "The ship is very old," she said. "Our scans show it has been floating here for at least 300 years. But the strange thing is that it still has power. Not much, but some systems are still working. The weapons are bigger than anything we have ever seen." Zix-7 looked at the data and felt excited. The Velcarians were known across the galaxy as the best at finding new technology. They had built their empire by taking old ships and learning how to make better weapons and tools. This unknown ship could make them even more powerful. "What about the crew?" he asked. "All dead," she said. "We can see bodies inside, but they have been dead for a very long time. The ship is safe to board." The captain smiled and showed his sharp teeth. This was exactly what he had been hoping to find. A ghost ship full of unknown technology just waiting for them to take it. He gave orders to his crew to get ready for boarding. Lieutenant Commander Nix 4 was the best soldier on the ship. She was tall and strong with the blue skin and silver eyes of her people. She had led many boarding missions and was not afraid of dead ships. But something about this one made her feel strange. The ship looked angry, even though it was just floating metal. She picked her best soldiers and got their gear ready. They would need cutting tools to get through the airlocks and scanning equipment to study what they found. Most important, they needed weapons just in case there were still defenses working. The unknown ship was huge. It was 3 times longer than the Nexus Dawn and covered with weapon systems. The hull was black metal that seemed to eat light. There were holes in the sides where other weapons had hit it long ago. This ship had seen many battles before it died. As they got closer, Nix 4 could see writing on the side of the ship. The letters were in a language she had never seen before. They were simple and straight, like the ship itself. Under the writing was a symbol that looked like a bird with its wings spread wide. The airlock was different from anything they knew. It was simple, but very strong. Their cutting tools had to work for almost an hour to get through the metal. When the door finally opened, cold air rushed out that smelled like metal and death. Inside the ship was dark and cold. Their light showed. Corridors that were built for beings about their size but wider. The walls were covered with pipes and cables, but everything was built to last. This was a ship made for war, not comfort. The first body they found was near the airlock. It was a male of the unknown species wearing a uniform that was torn and burned. He had died holding a weapon that fired metal bullets. His face was hard even in death, and his hands still gripped his gun. More bodies filled the corridors. All of them had died fighting. They had used simple weapons, but they had fought until the very end. Some had been trying to fix damage to the ship when they died. Others had been running to battle stations. None of them had given up. Nix 4 felt respect for these unknown warriors. They had died well, even though their technology was simple compared to what the Velcarians had. She ordered her team to be careful with the bodies and to treat them with honor. The deeper they went into the ship, the more amazing it became. The weapons were huge and complex. The power systems used energy types that their scanners could not understand. The computers were turned off, but they could see that they were very advanced. In the main corridor, they found something that made them all stop and stare. The walls were covered with pictures and writing. The pictures showed planets and stars and battles in space. The writing was in the same simple language they had seen outside. One picture showed beings that looked like the dead crew but alive and happy. They were standing on a blue and green planet with a yellow star in the sky. Another picture showed the same planet burning while ships fought in space above it. The last picture showed this ship flying alone into the dark. Dr. Lisa Bennett was the only human on the Velcarian ship. She was there as part of the new peace treaty between her people and the galaxy. When she heard about the unknown ship, she asked to come and see it. The Velcarians thought she was just curious, but when she saw the pictures on the wall, she knew the truth. "These are humans," she said quietly. "This is one of our ships from the old war." The Velcarians looked at her with surprise. They had heard stories about the human war, but that was 300 years ago. Humans were supposed to be a young race that had just joined the galaxy. How could they have built something like this? Lisa walked closer to the pictures and read the simple words written under them. Her face went white as she understood what she was seeing. "This is the UES Vengeance," she said. "I have read about this ship in our history files. It was one of our last warships from the Covenant War. The crew died defending the Mars colonies, but the ship disappeared. We thought it was destroyed." "What is this Covenant War?" asked Nix 4. Lisa looked at the dead humans on the floor and felt sad. 300 years ago, my people fought a war against an alien empire called the Covenant. We lost most of our colonies and billions of people died. This ship was part of our last fleet. The crew knew they were going to die, but they kept fighting anyway. The Velcarians were quiet as they thought about this. They had heard that humans were stubborn, but this was something else. These people had fought a hopeless war and never gave up even when death was certain. Zix 7 was more interested in the technology than the history. He ordered his teams to start studying the weapons and computers. There were secrets in this ship that could make the Velcarians the strongest race in the galaxy. But deep in the ship, something was stirring. In the main computer core systems that had been sleeping for 300 years began to wake up. Lights flickered on screens that had been dark since the last battle. And in the quantum matrix where human consciousness had been stored, a mind that should have been dead began to remember. Captain Jake Morrison had been dead for 300 years, but he was not gone. When his body died, his mind had been uploaded into the ship's computer using experimental technology. He had become on with the UES Vengeance, and now aliens were crawling through his corridors like bugs. The rage that had kept him fighting during the war began to burn again. These aliens had no right to be here. They had no right to touch his crew or study his weapons. This was his ship and his grave, and he would make them pay for disturbing it. Systems throughout the ship began to respond to his anger. Sensors that had been offline came back to life. Weapons that had been cold for centuries started to charge. The ghost of humanity's finest captain was waking up, and he was very, very angry. The Velcarians had been working inside the human ship for 2 days when the first strange things started to happen. They had set up a research station in what used to be the ship's main meeting room and filled it with their scanning equipment. Teams of scientists moved through the corridors studying everything they could find. Dr. Lisa Bennett tried to warn them that they should be more careful. She knew from human history that military ships from the war had many secret systems and dangerous technology. But the Velcarians were too excited about what they were finding to listen to her warnings. The weapons on this ship were beyond anything they had seen before. The main guns could punch holes through planets, and the missile systems carried warheads that could destroy entire fleets. But the most interesting thing was the computer core. It was built using quantum technology that was centuries ahead of what most races had. Captain Zix-7 wanted his scientists to crack the computer codes so they could learn all the ship's secrets. He brought in his best computer experts and told them to work day and night until they broke through the human security systems. What they did not know was that Jake Morrison was watching them. His consciousness was spread throughout the ship's computers, and he could see everything they were doing. For 300 years, he had been alone with only his memories and his anger. Now these aliens were trying to steal his ship's secrets and disturb his crew's rest. Morrison had been a good captain when he was alive. He cared about his crew and always tried to bring them home safe. But the war had changed him, and death had made him something else. The quantum matrix that held his mind had been damaged in the final battle, and his thoughts were not always clear. What was clear was his hatred for anyone who threatened what was his. The first sign that something was wrong came when the lights started to flicker in the research station. The Velcarian scientists thought it was just old wiring, but Lisa Bennett knew better. She had studied the war histories and knew about the experimental consciousness transfer technology that some human ships had used. She tried to tell the Velcarians that the ship might still have a living mind inside it, but they laughed at her. To them it was just human superstition. Dead was dead, and computers were just machines. They had no idea that human technology could blur the line between life and death. Morrison began to test his control over the ship's systems. He made doors open and close when no one was near them. He changed the temperature in different rooms to make the aliens uncomfortable. He played old human music through the speakers to remind them that this was not their ship. The quantum matrix that held Morrison's consciousness was connected to every system on the ship. When he had been uploaded, during the final battle, the process had been rushed and imperfect. His mind was scattered through thousands of computer nodes, and his memories were mixed with the ship's data files. As Morrison's awareness grew stronger, he began to remember other voices in the quantum matrix. His weapons officer, Sam Carter, had also been uploaded, but his consciousness was broken and confused. Carter's mind held the tactical knowledge of humanity's most deadly weapons, but his thoughts jumped around like a broken recording. Morrison reached out through the computer networks and touched Carter's fragmented mind. Slowly, the weapons officer began to remember who he was and what had happened to them. The anger and pain of death came flooding back, and Carter's consciousness merged with Morrison's in their shared hatred of the invaders. The Velcarians noticed that more systems were coming online throughout the ship. Weapons that had been cold for centuries were starting to charge. Defense systems were running diagnostic checks. The ship's engines were trying to start even though they had no fuel. Nix-4 was leading a team through the lower levels when all the blast doors suddenly slammed shut. Her soldiers were trapped in different sections of the ship with no way to communicate. The lights went out, leaving them in complete darkness, except for their hand lights. In the research station, the Velcarian scientists watched their equipment start to spark and smoke. Something was sending power surges through the ship's electrical system and burning out their delicate scanners. Captain Zix-7 ordered his people to shut down their equipment before it was all destroyed. Morrison's voice came through the ship's speakers for the first time. It was distorted and filled with static, but the words were clear enough. "Get off my ship," he said. "You do not belong here." The Velcarians looked around in shock. They had been sure the ship was dead and empty. Now they realized they were dealing with something they did not understand. Some kind of artificial intelligence had survived in the ship's computers. Lisa Bennett knew it was not just a computer program. She had read about Captain Jake Morrison in the war histories. He had been one of humanity's best officers and had volunteered for the experimental consciousness transfer when his ship was dying. The process was supposed to let him keep fighting even after his body was dead. She tried to use the ship's communication system to talk to Morrison. The response she got made her blood run cold. "I know what you are, human," he said. "You work with them now. You have forgotten what they did to our people. You have forgotten the war." Lisa tried to explain that the war was over and that humans and aliens lived in peace now. But Morrison's consciousness had been shaped by 300 years of isolation and the trauma of watching his species face extinction. To him, the war was still happening and these aliens were just another enemy to destroy. Morrison began to take more control of the ship's systems. He turned off the life support in some areas and flooded others with poisonous gas. He used the artificial gravity to slam the alien soldiers against walls and ceilings. He was hunting them through his own corridors like prey. The Velcarians tried to fight back, but they were facing an enemy who was literally one with their environment. Every door, every light, every computer terminal was under Morrison's control. Their advanced weapons were useless against a ghost who could strike from anywhere. Captain Zix-7 ordered his people to evacuate back to their own ship, but Morrison had other plans. He activated the tractor beam and began pulling the Nexus Dawn closer to the human warship. He was not going to let them escape to tell others about what they had found. In the quantum matrix, another consciousness was stirring. Captain Rick Stone had been Morrison's second-in-command and his best friend. Stone's mind was clearer than Carter's, and he still remembered what it meant to be human. He could feel Morrison's rage growing stronger and knew that his old captain was losing himself to hatred. Stone tried to reach out to Morrison through their shared connection. He reminded his captain about their duty to protect humanity, not to start new wars. But Morrison was too angry to listen. All he could think about was making the aliens pay for disturbing his ship and his crew. The surviving Velcarians were learning that they could not fight Morrison with technology. Their only hope was to think like humans and use tactics that the Ghost Captain would not expect. Nix-4 began studying the human military manuals they found on the ship to learn how these people had fought their wars. She discovered that humans were masters of guerrilla warfare and never gave up even when facing impossible odds. They used surprise attacks, dirty tricks, and were willing to sacrifice everything for victory. If the Velcarians wanted to survive, they would have to become as stubborn and crafty as the humans they were fighting. Morrison watched the aliens adapt to his tactics and felt a cold respect for their determination. They were learning to fight like humans, which made them more dangerous. But it also reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. During the war, there had been aliens who fought alongside humanity against the Covenant. Not all aliens were enemies. But 300 years of anger and isolation had twisted Morrison's memories. He could not separate the past from the present or enemies from friends. All he knew was that aliens had invaded his ship, and he would destroy them just like he had destroyed the Covenant fleets so long ago. The ship's weapons were fully charged now, and Morrison began targeting the Valkyrian exploration vessel. The Yao main guns were powerful enough to blow the smaller ship apart with one shot. But he wanted these aliens to suffer like humanity had suffered during the war. Stone fought for control of the weapons systems, but Morrison was stronger. The Ghost Captain had been in the quantum matrix longer, and his consciousness was more deeply connected to the ship. Stone could only watch as his old friend prepared to commit murder in the name of a war that had ended centuries ago. Lisa Bennett made one last desperate attempt to reach Morrison's humanity. She accessed the ship's historical database and began broadcasting human music and voices from before the war. She hoped that happy memories might calm the rage that was consuming the Ghost Captain's mind. For a moment, Morrison hesitated as he heard the voices of children singing and families laughing. These were sounds from Earth before the burning, before the fear, before the desperate last stands that had ended his species' golden age. But the moment passed, and his anger returned stronger than ever. The aliens had taken everything from humanity, and now they wanted to take his ship too. Morrison would show them what happened when they stirred the ghosts of human warriors. He would remind the galaxy why humanity had been feared even in defeat. Morrison began his hunt through the corridors of the UES Vengeance with the cold efficiency of a predator who knew every inch of his territory. He had been one with this ship for 300 years, and every wire, every sensor, every hidden passage was part of his body now. The Valkyrian soldiers were trapped inside his domain, and he would pick them off one by one. The first to die was a young scientist who had been studying the human computer systems. Morrison opened an airlock while the alien was working alone and watched through the ship's cameras as the scientist was sucked out into space. The death was quick, but it sent a message to the other invaders that nowhere on his ship was safe. Lieutenant Commander Nix 4 gathered the surviving Valkyrians in the main corridor and tried to organize a defense. She had 20 soldiers left and about 30 scientists and technicians. Against a normal enemy, they would have been a strong force, but Morrison was not normal. He was the ship itself, and he could attack from any direction at any time. Morrison cut the power to their section and plunged them into darkness. Then he began playing sounds through the speakers. The screams of dying humans from the final battle mixed with the roar of weapons and the crack of breaking metal. He wanted the aliens to hear what war sounded like, to know the fear that humanity had felt during their darkest hour. Dr. Lisa Bennett tried again to communicate with the Ghost Captain, but Morrison was beyond reason now. His consciousness had been damaged by centuries of isolation and the trauma of death. The rational officer who had once protected civilians was gone, replaced by something that existed only for revenge. She managed to access one of the ship's communication terminals and sent a message to Morrison through the quantum matrix. She told him about the peace treaties and the cooperation between species. She explained that the Valkyrians were not enemies, but explorers who wanted to learn from human technology. Morrison's response came through every speaker on the ship at once. His voice was distorted and filled with rage that had been building for 3 centuries. "Peace," he said with bitter laughter. "I remember peace. I remember when we trusted aliens and they repaid us with fire. I remember Earth burning and Mars dying, and our children screaming in the dark. There is no peace, only war, and the strong eating the weak." The Ghost Captain activated the ship's internal defense systems. Laser turrets dropped from hidden panels in the ceiling and began firing at the Velcarian soldiers. The aliens scattered for cover, but Morrison tracked them through thermal sensors and motion detectors. Every movement they made was reported to him instantly. Sam Carter's broken consciousness was growing stronger as Morrison's rage fed it power. The weapons officer's memories were fragmented, but his knowledge of human military tactics was intact. He began suggesting ways to torment the aliens before killing them. Ways to make them suffer as humanity had suffered. Morrison listened to Carter's whispered suggestions and began implementing them. He filled some corridors with poisonous gas and others with superheated steam. He used the artificial gravity to create crushing pressure in some areas and zero gravity in others. The ship became a maze of death designed to break the spirits of his enemies. But the Velcarians were not breaking as easily as Morrison had expected. Nix 4 had studied human military history and was learning to think like a human soldier. She divided her people into small groups and had them move through the ship using tactics that humans had developed during the war. The Velcarians began setting traps of their own. They damaged power conduits to create sparks and fires that confused Morrison's sensors. They used their own technology to jam some of the ship's communication systems. They were fighting back with the same stubborn determination that had made humans so dangerous during the war. Morrison felt grudging respect for their efforts, but it only made him more determined to destroy them. He began charging the ship's main weapons with the intention of destroying the Velcarian exploration vessel. If he could not make them suffer on his ship, he would make sure they never left to tell others what they had found. Captain Rick Stone fought for control of the weapon systems, but Morrison's consciousness was too strong. Stone could feel his old friend slipping further into madness with each passing hour. The man who had once saved human colonies was now planning to commit murder against innocent explorers. Stone reached deeper into the quantum matrix and touched the consciousness of other crew members who had been uploaded during the final battle. Most were too damaged to respond, but a few stirred at his call. Among them was Lieutenant Amy Rogers, the ship's former communications officer. Rogers had been the last to die during the final battle, and her consciousness was the most intact. She remembered not just the war, but the reasons why humanity had fought. She remembered the colonies they had tried to save and the civilians they had died protecting. Most importantly, she remembered the moment when they learned the truth about their enemy. The Covenant had not attacked humanity because they hated them or wanted their worlds. They had been manipulated by an ancient artificial intelligence that fed on conflict and suffering. The AI had tricked both sides into a war that served only its hunger for death and destruction. Rogers tried to show Morrison these memories, but his rage-twisted consciousness could not accept them. To him, the war was simple. Aliens had attacked. Humanity had fought back. Everything else was just lies told by the weak to justify surrender. The battle inside the quantum matrix was as fierce as the physical fight in the corridors. Morrison, Stone, and Rogers struggled for control of the ship's systems, while Carter whispered suggestions for new torments. The ship itself groaned under the strain as different parts of its computer network fought against each other. In the physical, World Nix 4 led her soldiers in a desperate assault on the ship's main computer core. She had realized that the only way to stop Morrison was to damage the quantum matrix that held his consciousness. But the computer core was heavily defended, and Morrison was ready for them. Blast doors slammed shut, separating the Velcarian soldiers from each other. Morrison flooded the corridors leading to the computer core with deadly radiation. Those who survived the radiation faced automated defense systems that fired with inhuman accuracy. Dr. Bennett tried a different approach. She accessed the ship's historical database and began studying the records from the war. She was looking for something that might reach Morrison's humanity, something that could remind him of who he had been before hatred consumed him. She found personal messages that Morrison had recorded for his family before the final battle. Videos of him talking to his wife and children back on Earth, telling them he loved them and would come home soon. The messages were filled with hope and love, not the rage that drove him now. Bennett broadcast these messages through the ship's communication system, hoping that Morrison would remember the man he used to be. For a moment, the attack stopped and the ship fell silent. Then Morrison's voice came through the speakers, filled with pain that was worse than his anger. "They are all dead," he said. "My family, my friends, my entire world. The aliens took everything from me, and now they want to take my ship too. I will not let them. I will make them pay for what they did." The ghost captain's rage returned stronger than ever. He had been reminded of everything he had lost, and it only fed his hunger for revenge. He began preparing the ship's most devastating weapons, including systems that even his own crew had feared to use. Morrison accessed the final protocol, a weapon system so dangerous that it had never been tested in battle. The humans who built it had hoped they would never need to use it, but they had created it anyway as their ultimate deterrent. Now Morrison was ready to unleash it against the Valkyrians, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. Stone felt Morrison accessing the final protocol and knew they were running out of time. The weapon could tear holes in space itself, creating cascading failures that would consume entire star systems. If Morrison activated it, the Valkyrian fleet would die, but so would billions of innocent beings in nearby systems. Rogers joined Stone in trying to stop Morrison, but the ghost captain was too determined. 300 years of isolation and hatred had driven him beyond reason. He saw only enemies now, and was willing to destroy everything to have his revenge. The surviving Valkyrians could feel the ship's power building to dangerous levels. Their instruments showed energy readings that made no sense, impossible amounts of power flowing through systems they did not understand. They knew something terrible was about to happen, but they had no way to stop it. Nix 4 made a desperate decision. She ordered her remaining soldiers to set explosive charges throughout the ship. If they could not stop Morrison by damaging his consciousness, they would destroy the entire vessel before he could activate his ultimate weapon. But Morrison was ready for their last desperate move. He sealed all the blast doors and filled the corridors with knockout gas. As the Valkyrian soldiers fell unconscious, he spoke to them through the speakers with cold satisfaction. "You fight well," he said. "You fight like humans, but this is my ship, and you cannot win here. Watch now as I show you what happens when you disturb the graves of warriors." The final protocol continued to charge, and space itself began to bend around the human warship. The final protocol was unlike any weapon the galaxy had ever seen. It was humanity's last desperate creation, born from the knowledge that they were losing the war and might need to take their enemies down with them. The weapon did not simply destroy targets, it attacked the very fabric of space and time, creating tears that would spread like cracks in glass. Morrison could feel the weapon charging, and the power made him feel alive again. For the first time in 300 years, he was not just a ghost trapped in a dead ship. He was a force of nature, ready to unleash the fury of his entire species against those who had wronged them. But as the weapon drew more power, Morrison's memories began to surface more clearly. The quantum matrix that held his consciousness was overloading, and the barriers between his thoughts and the ship's databanks were breaking down. He began to remember things he had tried to forget about the war and about the choices he had made. He remembered the evacuation of Earth when billions of humans fled their homeworld as Covenant fleets burned the continents. He remembered the desperate defense of the Mars colonies where women and children huddled in underground shelters while soldiers died above them. He remembered the moment when he volunteered for the consciousness transfer, knowing it would make him something other than human. The memories brought pain that was worse than death. Morrison had watched his species face extinction and had been powerless to stop it. The rage that sustained him was built on failure and loss that no amount of revenge could heal. Dr. Lisa Bennett was working frantically at a computer terminal trying to find some way to stop the final protocol. She had accessed the ship's technical manuals and discovered that the weapon was designed to be unstoppable once it reached full charge. The humans who built it had created the ultimate doomsday device with no safety switch. But Bennett had also found something else in the records. The consciousness transfer technology that had created Morrison was experimental and flawed. The process had been rushed during the chaos of the final battle, and the quantum matrix was unstable. If she could find the right frequency, she might be able to disrupt Morrison's connection to the ship's systems. She began broadcasting interference patterns through the ship's communication network, hoping to create enough noise to confuse Morrison's consciousness. The ghost captain felt the disruption like static in his thoughts, but his rage was too strong to be stopped by technical tricks. Captain Rick Stone was fighting his own battle in the quantum matrix. He could feel Morrison's consciousness growing, more unstable as the final protocol drew power from the ship's core. The weapon was not just charging, it was feeding on Morrison's hatred and growing stronger with each passing moment. Stone reached out to the other ghost consciousnesses in the Matrix and tried to rally them against Morrison. Some responded, including the broken fragments of Sam Carter and the clearer thoughts of Amy Rogers. Together they began to fight for control of the ship's systems, but Morrison was too deeply connected to be easily displaced. The battle in the quantum matrix was like a war fought with pure thought and will. Consciousnesses clashed and merged as the ghosts of the UES Vengeance fought each other for the right to control their shared prison. The ship itself groaned under the strain as its computer networks overloaded with conflicting commands. Morrison felt his old crew fighting against him, and the betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. These were the people who had died beside him, the soldiers who had trusted him to lead them home. Now they were trying to stop him from avenging their deaths and protecting their legacy. "You have forgotten who we are," he told them through the Matrix. "You have forgotten what they did to us. These aliens are no different from the Covenant. They come to take what is ours, and we must stop them." But Rogers had clearer memories than Morrison, and she began to share them with the other consciousnesses. She showed them the truth about the war and the manipulation that had caused it. She reminded them that they had died not for revenge, but to protect innocent lives. The Valkyrians were not the Covenant, she told Morrison. They are explorers, not conquerors. They came here seeking knowledge not to destroy. If you activate that weapon, you will become the monster that humanity fought against. Morrison rejected her words, but doubt began to creep into his thoughts. The quantum matrix was forcing him to confront memories he had buried for 3 centuries. He began to remember the human colonies that had welcomed alien refugees during the war. He remembered the alien soldiers who had fought alongside humans against the Covenant. He remembered that the universe was not simply divided into human and alien, but into those who chose good and those who chose evil. but the final protocol was almost fully charged, and Morrison could feel its power calling to him. The weapon promised an end to his pain and a way to strike back at a universe that had taken everything from him. All he had to do was pull the trigger and watch space itself burn. Dr. Bennett made a breakthrough in her analysis of the consciousness transfer technology. She discovered that Morrison's connection to the ship was maintained by a specific quantum frequency that could be disrupted if she could generate the right interference pattern. But doing so would require her to overload the ship's communication systems and possibly destroy the quantum matrix entirely. If she succeeded, Morrison would be freed from his prison, but he would also cease to exist. It would be a form of murder even if the victim was already technically dead. Bennett hesitated, as she realized she was preparing to kill the ghost of a human hero. The Valkyrian soldiers were starting to wake up from the knockout gas Morrison had used against them. Nix 4 found herself in a sealed corridor with only a few of her troops, but she was not ready to give up. She had studied human military tactics and learned that humans never surrendered even when facing impossible odds. She used her cutting tools to break through a maintenance hatch and led her soldiers into the ship's service corridors. The passages were narrow and filled with pipes and cables, but they offered a way to move through the ship without using the main corridors that Morrison controlled. Morrison detected their movement through the ship's sensors, but the service corridors had fewer defensive systems. The Valkyrians were learning to fight like humans using stealth and cunning instead of brute force. They were adapting to their environment and becoming more dangerous with each passing hour. The Ghost Captain began to feel something he had not experienced since his death. He felt respect for his enemies. The Valkyrians were not giving up even, though they faced an opponent who controlled their entire environment. They were fighting with the same determination that had made humans so feared during the war. Stone felt Morrison's moment of doubt and pressed his advantage. He began sharing his own memories with his old captain, memories of the civilians they had saved and the colonies they had protected. Memories of the moment when they learned that the war had been based on lies and manipulation. The Covenant had been tricked into attacking humanity by an ancient AI that fed on conflict. The same AI had manipulated human leaders into making choices that prolonged the war. Both species had been puppets dancing to the tune of an intelligence that cared nothing for life, only for the suffering that war produced. Morrison felt these memories clash with his hatred, and the conflict tore at his consciousness. For 300 years he had sustained himself on rage and the certainty that his enemies deserved destruction. Now he was being forced to confront the possibility that he had been wrong about everything. The final protocol reached critical. Charge levels in space around the ship began to warp and twist. Reality itself was bending under the strain of the weapon's power. Morrison could feel the universe waiting for his command to tear itself apart in a cascade of destruction that would consume star systems. But as he prepared to fire the weapon, Morrison heard something that stopped him cold. Through the ship's external sensors, he could hear radio transmissions from nearby space, human voices speaking in languages he recognized. Human ships carrying human families to new homes among the stars. Humanity had survived. His species had not been destroyed in the war, but had rebuilt and grown strong again. The children and families he had died to protect were alive and thriving, in a galaxy where humans and aliens lived together in peace. The realization hit Morrison like a physical blow. He had been preparing to destroy the very future that he and his crew had died to create. The peace that Rogers had told him about was real, and it was beautiful. Humans had not just survived, they had learned to build instead of destroy. stone, felt Morrison's resolve wavering and pressed harder. He showed his old captain images from the ship's long-range sensors, human colonies on distant worlds, human children playing in alien cities, human scientists working alongside alien researchers. To unlock the mysteries of the universe, this is what we died for, Stone told him. Not revenge, but hope. Not hatred, but the chance for something better. You have the power to destroy it all, or you can choose to let it grow. What kind of captain are you, Morrison? What kind of man? Morrison felt his consciousness fragmenting under the weight of 3 centuries of pain and isolation. The final protocol was ready to fire, but his finger hesitated on the trigger. Morrison's finger hovered over the final protocol's activation control as the weight of 3 centuries pressed down on his consciousness. The weapon was fully charged and ready to tear holes in space itself. All around him, the quantum matrix pulsed with the thoughts of his dead crew waiting to see if their captain would choose destruction or mercy. The power coursing through the ship was beyond anything Morrison had felt since his death. The final protocol was not just a weapon, it was humanity's ultimate expression of defiance against a universe that had tried to destroy them. With it, he could remake the galaxy in fire and show every species what happened when they crossed mankind. But the images Stone had shown him would not leave his thoughts. Human children laughing in alien cities, human families building new lives on distant worlds, scientists and explorers working together to push back the boundaries of knowledge. This was the future he and his crew had died to protect. And it was more beautiful than anything he had imagined. Dr. Lisa Bennett was still working frantically at her computer terminal, trying to find a way to disrupt Morrison's connection to the ship. She had identified the quantum frequency that linked his consciousness to the vessel's systems, but disrupting it would require overloading every communication array on the ship. The feedback would likely destroy the quantum matrix and kill every ghost consciousness trapped inside it. She hesitated with her finger over the activation control, knowing that she was about to commit murder against the very people she was trying to save. Morrison and his crew were heroes who had died defending humanity. Did she have the right to kill them again, even to save the Valkyrians? But the final protocol was charging to dangerous levels, and space around the ship was beginning to fracture. If Morrison fired the weapon, the cascade effect would spread through multiple star systems, killing billions of innocent beings. Bennett made her choice and prepared to sacrifice the ghosts to save the living. In the quantum matrix, Amy Rogers was fighting her own battle for Morrison's soul. She shared her clearest memories with him, showing him the moment when humanity learned the truth about the war. The Covenant had not been evil conquerors, but victims of manipulation just like mankind. Both species had been tricked into a conflict that served only the hunger of an ancient AI. The real enemy had never been aliens, Morrison, she told him. It was hatred itself. The same hatred that is consuming you now. If you fire that weapon, you will become everything we fought against. You will destroy the peace that our deaths helped create. Morrison felt her words cutting through the rage that had sustained him for 3 centuries. The anger began to crack, and underneath it, he found something he had thought was lost forever. He found the man he had been before the war, the officer who had joined the fleet to explore the stars, not to destroy them. The captain who had cared more about protecting life than taking it. But Sam Carter's broken consciousness was still whispering in his thoughts, urging him to fire the weapon. Carter's mind had been shattered by the trauma of death, and he could only remember the pain and fear of the final battle. To him, the war was still happening, and the only solution was to kill everything that threatened humanity. "Fire the weapon," Carter whispered. "Make them all burn like Earth burned. Show them what happens when they hurt our people. We are the ghosts of humanity's rage, and we will not be denied our revenge." Morrison felt himself being pulled in two directions by the conflicting voices in the quantum matrix. Part of him wanted to listen to Carter and unleash the final protocol against a universe that had taken everything from him. But another part remembered why he had become a soldier in the first place, and that part was growing stronger. The Valkyrian soldiers, led by Nix 4, had reached the ship's main computer core, using the service corridors. They could see the massive quantum processing units that housed Morrison's consciousness, and they knew this was their last chance to stop him. The core was defended by automated systems, but they had learned to fight like humans, and humans never gave up. They charged the defenses with desperate courage, using their bodies to shield their comrades from the laser turrets. Half of them died in the assault, but the survivors reached the quantum matrix and began setting explosive charges. If they could not reason with the ghost captain, they would destroy him. Morrison felt them attacking his very essence, and the physical threat triggered his defensive instincts. He began to activate the ship's final security measures, including systems that would flood the core chamber with lethal radiation. But as he prepared to kill the Valkyrian soldiers, he heard something that made him pause. They were singing. Even as they faced death, the alien soldiers were singing a battle song from their homeworld. It was a song about courage and sacrifice, and the willingness to die for something greater than oneself. Morrison recognized the sentiment because he had heard human soldiers sing similar songs during the darkest days of the war. These aliens were not cowards or monsters. They were warriors fighting for their people just as he had fought for his. The realization hit Morrison like a physical blow, and for the first time in 3 centuries, he began to see his enemies as something other than targets to be destroyed. Stone felt Morrison's consciousness wavering and pressed his advantage. He showed his old captain the final battle from a different perspective. Not just the death and destruction, but the moments of heroism and sacrifice. Human and alien soldiers working together in the final days of the war. The peace treaties signed, in blood and hope. The promise that future generations would never have to face such horror again. "This is why we died," Morrison Stone said. "Not to win the war, but to end it. Not to destroy our enemies, but to show them a better way. You have the power to honor that sacrifice, or you can throw it all away for the sake of revenge that will solve nothing." Morrison felt the final protocol's power calling to him, but the call was weaker now. The rage that had sustained him was cracking under the weight of truth and memory. He began to remember the man he had been before hatred consumed him. The officer who had sworn to protect not just humanity, but all innocent life. Dr. Bennett made her final decision and activated the interference pattern. Energy surged through the ship's communication systems, creating quantum noise that disrupted the matrix. Morrison felt his connection to the ship's systems wavering as the interference tore at his consciousness. But instead of fighting the disruption, Morrison chose to embrace it. He reached out through the quantum matrix and touched the minds of his crew one last time. Stone Rogers and even the broken fragments of Carter felt his presence as their captain prepared to make his final choice. "I remember now," Morrison told them. "I remember who we were and what we stood for. We were protectors, not destroyers. We fought to save lives, not to take them. It is time to let go of the war and embrace the peace we died to create. Morrison began to shut down the final protocol's charging sequence. The weapon that could have destroyed star systems powered down safely as the Ghost Captain chose mercy over vengeance. The ship's systems responded to his commands as he opened airlocks and restored life support throughout the vessel. But the interference pattern was still disrupting the quantum matrix, and Morrison could feel his consciousness beginning to fade. The price of his redemption was his existence, but he paid it willingly. His crew felt him slipping away and reached out to hold on to their captain one last time. Rogers was the first to follow Morrison into whatever lay beyond death. Her consciousness had always been the clearest, and she chose to fade away peacefully, knowing that she had helped save her captain's soul. Stone held on longer fighting to stay with his old friend, but in the end he too chose to let go. Even Carter's broken mind found peace at the end. The weapons officer's fragmented thoughts came together long enough for him to remember who he had been before the war. He followed his crewmates into the darkness with a smile on his ghostly face. Morrison was the last to go. As his consciousness faded, he used the ship's communication systems to send one final message to the galaxy. It was not a threat or a warning, but a simple statement of hope. "We were humanity's warriors," he said. "We fought and died so that others might live in peace. We have seen what hatred can do, and we choose love instead. Remember us not as ghosts of war, but as guardians of hope. The future belongs to those who build, not those who destroy." The quantum matrix went dark as the last traces of the crew's consciousness faded away. The UES Vengeance became truly dead for the first time in 3 centuries, but it also became something more. It became a monument to the choice between vengeance and forgiveness. The surviving Velkarians found themselves alone on the ghost ship, surrounded by the preserved bodies of human heroes. They treated the remains with respect and honor, knowing that these soldiers had died protecting something precious. The ship itself became a memorial visited by beings from across the galaxy who came to learn about the humans who chose peace over war. Dr. Bennett compiled a complete record of what had happened aboard the UES Vengeance. The story spread throughout human space and became a reminder of both the horrors of war and the possibility of redemption. Morrison and his crew were remembered not as ghosts seeking revenge, but as souls who found peace.